I am Natalie Bailey, 28 years old, and until last month, I thought I understood what family meant. My grandmother Eleanor was my rock, my confidant, the one person who truly saw me. When she passed, I expected grief, not betrayal. I never imagined being barred from her will reading by my own relatives. We already divided everything, my Aunt Patricia announced coldly. You were not invited for a reason. But when the lawyer frowned and said, "But her name is the only one in the will," the room went deadly silent. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me through this wild journey of family secrets and unexpected justice. Growing up, my relationship with Grandma Eleanor was special in ways I did not fully appreciate until I was older. While the rest of my family chased status and wealth, Grandma was different. She lived in a beautiful historic estate that had been in the family for generations, but she carried herself with a humility that always made me feel at home. Our family dynamics were complicated, to say the least. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, was the self-appointed matriarch after my grandfather died. She married Uncle Roger, a successful businessman who cared more about golf handicaps and investment portfolios than actual human connections. Their children, my cousins, Heather and Taylor, grew up with silver spoons firmly planted in their mouths and attitudes to match. "Natalie, dear, still wearing those discount store clothes?" Aunt Patricia would say during family gatherings, not quite hiding her smirk behind her wine glass. "I could take you shopping sometime. Everyone notices, you know." My mother Diane never defended me against these barbs. She was the younger sister who had married beneath her station, according to family opinion. My father James was a high school teacher who worked hard, but remained distant, often taking extra jobs to try to keep up with the family's expectations. I watched my mother constantly seek approval from Patricia and Roger, modifying her opinions, her style, even her laugh to try to fit in. Grandma Eleanor was the only one who seemed immune to the family's obsession with appearances. Her estate was grand, yes, but she lived simply. The family gatherings there were exercises in silent judgment, my cousins flaunting designer labels while I wore the same dress I had worn to the last 3 events. "Come help me in the kitchen," Natalie Grandma would say, rescuing me from uncomfortable conversations. In the sanctuary of her huge, warm kitchen, with its outdated appliances that she refused to replace, she would tell me stories about her own youth. "I married your grandfather when he was just a bookstore owner," she told me once while kneading bread dough. "My parents nearly disowned me. He became wealthy later, but we were happy, even when we had nothing." As I grew older, I began to notice how Grandma treated me differently from my cousins. While she was kind to everyone, she engaged with me on a deeper level. When I decided to major in social work instead of business or law, as the family tradition dictated, only Grandma supported me. "The world has enough people chasing money," she said, squeezing my hand. "It needs more people chasing change." The family's disapproval was immediate and harsh. During one holiday dinner when I was 22, Uncle Roger asked about my career plans. "Nonprofit work," I answered honestly. "I have an internship with a homeless youth organization downtown." The table fell silent before erupting in poorly concealed laughter. "Darling, that is very sweet," Aunt Patricia said condescendingly. "But surely that is just a phase. No one actually chooses to be poor." What my family did not know was that Grandma Eleanor had been secretly supporting my education and even making anonymous donations to the organizations where I volunteered. She believed in my path when no one else did. "Your grandfather and I always wanted to do more charitable work," she confided in me once. "We started a small foundation, but it got lost in the family business. Perhaps you can revive that dream someday." As Grandma aged and I built my career in nonprofit management, our bond grew stronger. I visited her weekly, even when my schedule was packed with grant applications and community outreach programs. We would sit in her sunroom drinking tea and discussing everything from politics to philosophy. My cousins rarely visited unless there was a family event that required appearance, and even my mother only stopped by when Aunt Patricia organized group visits. Yet they all claimed to be close to Grandma, posting carefully staged photos with her on social media, with captions about precious family time. The family's resentment toward me grew with each passing year. They saw my relationship with Grandma as threatening somehow, as if love was a finite resource that I was hoarding. Little did I know that this jealousy would eventually explode into something much uglier, something that would reveal the true nature of the people I called family. By the time I turned 26, I had established myself in the nonprofit sector, working as a program director for an organization that provided educational resources to underprivileged communities. The pay was modest, but the work fulfilled me in ways that my family could never understand. Despite my busy schedule, I maintained my weekly visits to Grandma Eleanor, bringing her books, sharing stories about my work, and simply enjoying her company. It was during one of these visits that I first noticed the significant decline in her health. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, and she seemed to tire more easily than before. "Have you seen a doctor recently, Grandma?" I asked, concerned by the new pallor in her complexion. "Dr. Lewis visits every month now," she said dismissively. "Just old age catching up with me, dear. Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. Within weeks of noticing these changes, I learned that Grandma had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The prognosis was unclear. She might have years left, or only months. This news spread through the family quickly and suddenly. Relatives who had been too busy to visit for years were making regular appearances at the estate. "We simply must move you to a facility with proper care," Aunt Patricia insisted during a family dinner, celebrating Grandma's 85th birthday. I had planned a small, intimate gathering, but Patricia had overridden my plans, inviting extended family and even business associates of Uncle Roger. "I am perfectly comfortable in my own home," Grandma replied firmly. "Natalie has arranged for a nurse to check on me daily, and that is sufficient." Patricia shot me a venomous look. "Natalie seems to think she knows what is best for everyone. Tell me, dear niece, what medical qualifications do you have exactly?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I took a deep breath before responding. "I consulted with Grandma's doctors and followed their recommendations. They believe familiar surroundings are better for her overall well-being." "How convenient that those recommendations keep you in control of the situation," Patricia snapped. That was when I finally stood up for myself. This is not about control. This is about respecting Grandma's wishes and her dignity. If you were here more often before she got sick, you might know what those wishes are. The explosion was immediate. Patricia called me ungrateful and accused me of trying to manipulate Grandma for financial gain. Uncle Roger suggested that my nonprofit work was just a cover for my laziness and inability to succeed in the real world. Even my cousins joined in Heather, suggesting that I had brainwashed Grandma against the family. My mother sat silently, eyes downcast, while my father awkwardly suggested we all calm down. But the damage was done. From that moment forward, I was labeled the family opportunist, the ungrateful charity case, who was taking advantage of an elderly woman's affection. Patricia began a campaign against me, calling other family members to spread rumors. She even contacted Grandma's friends, suggesting that I was isolating her for my own purposes. The worst part was that these tactics worked. People began to look at me differently, and my access to Grandma became increasingly restricted. "Your aunt thinks it would be best if visits were scheduled through her," the new daytime nurse told me when I arrived for my usual Wednesday afternoon visit. "Apparently Miss Eleanor has been very tired after your visits." I was heartbroken, but refused to give up. I called instead of visiting, though those calls became shorter as Grandma's energy waned. During one of our last meaningful conversations about 3 months before she passed, Grandma seemed unusually urgent. "Natalie, there is something in the attic I want you to have," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "A wooden box with brass corners in the north corner under the eaves. Will you get it for me next time?" "Of course, Grandma. What is in it?" Just some old memories that might make more sense to you than anyone else, she replied cryptically. And a key. The key is important, Natalie. I promised to retrieve the box on my next visit, but when I arrived the following week, I was turned away at the door by Uncle Roger, who claimed Grandma was too tired for visitors. I tried again several times with the same result. In desperation, I came very early one morning, hoping to speak with the night nurse before she left. The night nurse Rachel was more sympathetic than her daytime counterpart. She asks about you, Rachel confided. I can give you 15 minutes while I file my report, but if anyone catches you, I never saw you. I slipped upstairs and found Grandma asleep. Not wanting to wake her, I crept to the attic, instead determined to fulfill at least part of my promise. I found the box exactly where she had described it and opened it carefully. Inside were bundles of old letters, photographs I had never seen before, and a small brass key attached to a faded ribbon. I closed the box and took it with me, intending to bring it to Grandma when she woke. But as I descended the attic stairs, I heard voices below. Aunt Patricia had arrived early. Rather than cause a scene, I slipped the box into my bag and left through the service entrance planning to bring it on my next successful visit, but that visit never came. 2 weeks later, my mother called to tell me Grandma had been moved to the hospital. 3 days after that, she was gone. I had not even had the chance to say goodbye. The wooden box remained in my apartment, unopened after my initial discovery. Something told me that whatever secrets it contained were meant for after Grandma was gone. I had no idea just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. The news about the will reading came not from a formal notification, but from a group text my cousin Taylor sent presumably by accident. Will reading at Grandma's house Thursday at 2:00 p.m. Professional attire expected it. Read followed quickly by, "Oops, wrong group chat." Despite the clear implication that I was not supposed to be informed, I decided to attend. Grandma Eleanor was my grandmother too, and regardless of family tensions, I deserved to be there for this final chapter. I spent Wednesday night preparing myself emotionally, selecting a simple black dress that was respectful, yet professional. I even dug out the pearl earrings Grandma had given me for my college graduation, the only piece of family jewelry I owned. Thursday afternoon was unseasonably warm for October, the kind of golden autumn day Grandma had always loved. I arrived at the estate 15 minutes early, parking my decade-old Honda between Patricia's Mercedes and Roger's BMW. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the familiar stone path to the front door, memories flooding back with each step. The butler Graham opened the door with a surprised expression. "Miss Natalie," he said, his professional demeanor slipping slightly to reveal what looked like concern. "I was not informed you would be attending." "I am Family Graham," I replied gently. "I should be here." He nodded slightly and stepped aside to let me enter. The foyer was filled with relatives in somber designer clothing, their conversations halting abruptly as I walked in. Cousin Taylor's eyes widened, and she immediately scurried off to find her mother. I walked into the main sitting room where the reading was to take place. Family members I had not seen in years glanced away awkwardly when I made eye contact. My mother approached cautiously, looking nervous. "Natalie, honey, I did not know you were coming," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Patricia is organizing everything." "I saw the group text," I explained. "I have every right to be here." Before my mother could respond, Aunt Patricia marched into the room, her face contorted with barely controlled anger. Uncle Roger followed close behind, his hand on her elbow, as if restraining her. "What are you doing here?" Patricia demanded, not bothering to lower her voice. "This is a private family meeting." "I am family," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Grandma was my grandmother too." Patricia laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Family. You have not acted like family. You manipulated a sick old woman and turned her against the rest of us. You were not invited for a reason." People were staring now, some with undisguised curiosity, others with discomfort. I felt my cheeks burning but stood my ground. I never manipulated anyone. I simply loved her, and spent time with her, which is more than most people in this room can say. How dare you, Patricia hissed. We already divided everything according to what Grandma would have wanted. You were excluded because of your behavior. Everyone knows you were just after her money. The accusation stung like a physical slap. That is not true. I never asked Grandma for anything. Please, Patricia scoffed. Your little poverty tourism career was not fooling anyone. We all know you expected Grandma to bail you out of your poor life choices. My mother finally spoke up, though her voice was timid. Patricia, maybe we should just let her stay. What harm could it do? Stay out of this, Diane Patricia snapped. You never could control your daughter. That is why she turned out this way. The room had gone completely silent, everyone watching our confrontation with uncomfortable fascination. Uncle Roger stepped forward, attempting a more diplomatic approach. Natalie, this is a difficult time for everyone. Perhaps it would be best if you left now, and we can discuss any concerns you have later in a more appropriate setting. I looked around the room at the faces of people who shared my blood but seemed like strangers. I am not leaving. Grandma would have wanted me here. Patricia's face hardened. Fine. You leave me no choice. She pulled out her cell phone and made a brief call. Within minutes, a security guard I had never seen before appeared at the doorway. This woman is trespassing, Patricia informed him coldly. Please escort her off the property. Miss, I need to ask you to come with me, the guard said, looking uncomfortable but determined. The humiliation was overwhelming. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at my family searching for anyone who might defend me. My mother looked away. My father stared at his shoes. Even my younger cousins, with whom I had once played hide and seek in this very house, avoided my gaze. Fine, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I will go, but Grandma would be ashamed of all of you right now. I walked out with as much dignity as I could, muster the security guard following a respectful distance behind me. Once outside, I made it to my car before the tears came in earnest. I sat behind the wheel, sobbing like I had not done since I was a child. The grief of losing Grandma, compounded by this final rejection from my family, was almost too much to bear. I am not sure how long I sat there crying before my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Wait there. Do not leave. Alexander Morris, Eleanor's attorney. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a mess. Mascara streaked down my cheeks, eyes puffy and red. The last thing I wanted was to meet with some lawyer while looking like this, but curiosity overrode my embarrassment. I had never met Grandma's attorney before, and had no idea why he would be reaching out to me now, after such a humiliating exit. 5 minutes later, a tall man in a charcoal gray suit approached my car. He appeared to be in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I rolled down my window cautiously. Miss Bailey, I am Alexander Morris. I was your grandmother's attorney for over 20 years. He extended his hand, which I shook hesitantly. May I join you for a moment? Or perhaps we could sit on that bench near the garden. I opted for the bench, needing fresh air and distance from the house, where my family was still gathered. We walked in silence to a wrought iron bench overlooking Grandma's beloved rose garden, now beginning to fade with the autumn chill. I must apologize for what happened in there, Alexander began once we were seated. I arrived late to find that your family had conducted some sort of unofficial reading without me. They said everything was already divided, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Alexander frowned deeply. That is impossible. A will cannot be executed without the executor, which in this case is me. Whatever they were doing in there was not legal or binding. A small flicker of hope ignited within me. So, what happens now? Now, he said, reaching into his briefcase, we address the actual will. But before we go back in there is something you should know. He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. Your name is the only one in the will, Miss Bailey. I stared at him in disbelief. What? That cannot be right. What about my mother? My aunt. The rest of the family. There are conditions and stipulations for the others, he clarified, but the primary beneficiary is you. Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes. He handed me a document in a blue folder. This is a copy of the will. You can review it before we return to the house. With trembling hands, I opened the folder and scanned the first page. There it was in black and white. I, Eleanor Margaret Bailey, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate to my granddaughter, Natalie Grace Bailey. This does not make sense, I whispered. Why would she do this? The family is going to be furious. Your grandmother had her reasons, Alexander replied gently, and she anticipated the reaction. That is why she was so specific in her instructions to me. I closed the folder, trying to process this bombshell. What do we do now? Now, Alexander said, standing and offering me his hand, we go back in there, and I do my job as executor. Are you ready for that? It will not be pleasant. I thought about running away, avoiding the confrontation altogether. But Grandma had made her choice, and I owed it to her to see it through. Yes, I said, squaring my shoulders. I am ready. We walked back to the house together, Alexander slightly ahead as we approached the front door. This time, when Graham opened it, his face registered surprise, followed by something that looked almost like satisfaction. Mr. Morris, he said with a formal nod. They are waiting in the sitting room. The conversation in the room died instantly when we entered. Aunt Patricia was the first to recover her expression, shifting from shock to barely concealed rage. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. We asked her to leave. And I have asked her to return, Alexander? Replied smoothly. As the executor of Eleanor Bailey's last will and testament, I cannot proceed without all relevant parties present. Relevant parties. Uncle Roger repeated, his businessman's instincts clearly sensing trouble. What exactly does that mean? Alexander placed his briefcase on the ornate coffee table and removed several official-looking documents. It means that I am here to conduct the official reading of Eleanor Bailey's will, which can only be done by me as the named executor. Whatever discussions you have had previously were premature and non-binding. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. My cousins exchanged worried glances. My mother looked confused. Aunt Patricia's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. But we already agreed on how things would be distributed, she protested, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Eleanor and I discussed her wishes extensively. I am afraid that any verbal agreements are superseded by the legal document Mrs. Bailey signed and had properly witnessed, Alexander replied, his tone professionally detached. Now, if everyone would please be seated, we can proceed with the official reading. As everyone reluctantly took their seats, Alexander caught my eye and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod of encouragement. I sat in a chair near the door, apart from the rest of the family, my heart pounding in my chest. The room went deadly silent as Alexander put on his reading glasses and began to speak. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Bailey. Alexander began, his voice carrying a formal weight that commanded attention. Dated April 15th of this year, and witnessed by myself and Dr. Lewis Harrington. April 15th. I quickly calculated in my head. That was just after the disastrous birthday party where I had confronted Aunt Patricia. It was also after Grandma's health had begun to seriously decline. Alexander continued reading. I, Eleanor Margaret Bailey, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my final wishes regarding the distribution of my estate and assets. He paused briefly, glancing around the room. Before specifying the distributions, Mrs. Bailey included a personal statement that she requested be read in full. Patricia shifted impatiently in her seat. Is that really necessary? We all knew, Mother. Just get to the relevant parts. Alexander fixed her with a stern look. As executor, I am obligated to read the will exactly as written. This is a legal proceeding. Mrs. Winters, not a casual conversation. Properly chastised, Patricia fell silent, and Alexander returned to the document. To my family gathered here today. Throughout my 85 years, I have come to understand that the true measure of wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in how we choose to share it. Money and possessions mean nothing if they do not serve a greater purpose or reflect deeper values. For many years I have watched with growing concern as certain members of this family have become increasingly fixated on material wealth and social status, often at the expense of compassion, authenticity, and genuine connection. I have seen kindness mistaken for weakness and generosity viewed with suspicion. While some of you visited only when it was convenient or advantageous, one person in this family demonstrated consistent love, respect, and care, without expectation of reward. One person saw me as a human being, rather than a legacy or an inheritance. It is for this reason that I have made the following decisions regarding my estate. The room was deadly quiet. I could feel eyes turning toward me, some questioning, others beginning to understand the implications of Grandma's words. Alexander turned the page and continued reading. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the family home, all financial assets, investments, and personal property, to my granddaughter Natalie Grace Bailey. The explosion was immediate and deafening. "This is outrageous!" Aunt Patricia shrieked, leaping to her feet. She obviously manipulated Mother when she was vulnerable and sick. "That cannot be legal," Uncle Roger declared, his face flushing deep red. "Eleanor was not in her right mind. We will contest this." My cousins began talking over each other, Heather actually bursting into theatrical tears, while Taylor shouted about family betrayal. More distant relatives murmured in shocked disbelief. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what was happening. The entire estate, Grandma had left me everything. It seemed impossible, overwhelming, and frankly terrifying. Alexander waited patiently for the initial uproar to subside, before raising his hand for silence. "If I may continue, there are additional stipulations." The room gradually quieted, everyone too anxious to hear the rest to maintain their outbursts. "While the estate in its entirety is bequeathed to Natalie Bailey," Alexander read, "Mrs. Bailey has established a series of conditional bequests to other family members." Hope visibly surged through the room, people sitting up straighter, expressions shifting from outrage to calculation. "These conditional bequests," Alexander continued, "are dependent upon the treatment of Natalie Bailey by the family members in question, both prior to my death and in the aftermath of this will reading." The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost see the wheels turning in everyone's heads as they mentally reviewed their interactions with me. Mrs. Bailey maintained detailed records of family interactions, correspondence, and behavior. Alexander explained, setting aside the will to reference another document. She also consulted with me regularly about her observations. My mind flashed to the wooden box in my apartment. The letters, the photographs, they must have been part of this documentation. "Each potential beneficiary has been assessed according to criteria Eleanor established," Alexander continued. "These include, but are not limited to, demonstrated respect for Natalie's, support for her career choices, inclusion in family events, and abstention from disparaging remarks about her character or motivations." Uncle Roger cleared his throat. "And who exactly made these subjective judgments? How can we verify any of this?" "Mrs. Bailey kept extensive notes," Alexander replied calmly. "Additionally, she employed the services of Westlake Investigations to document certain incidents she found particularly concerning." Private investigators. The revelation stunned me as much as everyone else. Grandma had been quietly building a case, watching and documenting everything. "This is insane," Patricia declared. "My own mother spied on us." She protected her granddaughter from what she perceived as a coordinated campaign of isolation and emotional abuse, Alexander corrected. "And based on my observation of events today, her concerns appear to have been well-founded." He turned to another page in his documents. "Now regarding the specific conditional bequests, Mrs. Bailey established a trust of $5 million to be distributed among family members, according to the assessment metrics I mentioned. Based on the documentation provided to me, I regret to inform you that currently none of the family members present have qualified for their portions. The resulting chaos made the previous outburst seem mild by comparison. Accusations flew across the room, most directed at me, some at Alexander, and others at Grandma herself. Uncle Roger threatened lawsuits, Patricia called me manipulative and deceitful, and several cousins suggested I had somehow coerced or tricked Grandma into this decision. Through it all, Alexander remained calm, occasionally referencing specific documents when particularly egregious claims were made. On March 10th, he noted at one point Mrs. Winters instructed the household staff to inform Natalie that her grandmother was unavailable for visits, despite Mrs. Bailey specifically asking to see her granddaughter that day. Patricia paled visibly at this specific call-out, then quickly recovered. Mother was confused. She needed rest, not emotional disturbances. Dr. Harrington's notes from that day indicate Mrs. Bailey was lucid and in good spirits, Alexander countered. He specifically recommended family visits as beneficial to her mental health. As the arguments continued, I noticed my mother sitting quietly, tears streaming down her face. Unlike the others, she had not joined in the accusations. When our eyes met across the room, she quickly looked away, guilt evident in her expression. Finally, when the initial storm of protests had somewhat subsided, Alexander raised his voice slightly. I should note that Mrs. Bailey anticipated these reactions. She had her mental competency officially evaluated 3 separate times during the drafting of this will, specifically to address any potential challenges. The will is legally bulletproof. He then turned to me directly. Miss Bailey, your grandmother left you a private letter as well. Would you like to receive it now or later in private? All eyes turned to me. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, later, please. Alexander nodded and returned to addressing the room. The conditional bequests remain available to qualified family members for a period of 1 year following this reading. Mrs. Bailey was very clear that she hoped reconciliation would be possible, though she left the terms of that reconciliation entirely in Natalie's hands. And with those words, every calculating gaze in the room shifted to me. In the span of an hour, I had gone from family outcast to the sole arbiter of their financial futures. The realization was as terrifying as it was surreal. The formal will reading concluded with Alexander providing me with contact information and arranging a private meeting for the following day to discuss the details of the estate. As family members began to disperse their shock, giving way to strategic thinking, I found myself approached from all sides. Natalie, sweetie, Aunt Patricia said, her voice honey-sweet, in a complete reversal from her earlier venom. This must be so overwhelming for you. Why do not you? Come, stay with Roger and me for a few days. We have plenty of room, and we can help you navigate all these complicated legal matters. The transparent attempt to manipulate me was almost laughable. Thank you, but I will be fine at my own apartment, I replied neutrally. Uncle Roger tried a different approach, sidling up with a businesslike demeanor. You know, Natalie, managing an estate of this size requires considerable financial expertise. I would be happy to partner with you on investment strategies. In fact, we could create a family business venture that would benefit everyone. I will consider all options carefully, I said, deliberately vague. My cousins were even more obvious, with Taylor suddenly recalling how much fun we had as children, and Heather mentioning a charity gala. She thought I might want to attend now that you will be a woman of means. I excused myself from these transparent overtures and headed toward the door, desperate for fresh air and space to process everything. As I reached the foyer, my mother caught up with me, her eyes red from crying. Natalie, please. Can we talk for a moment? Just the two of us? Despite my emotional exhaustion, I nodded and followed her into a small side room that had once been Grandma's music room. The grand piano stood silent and dusty, unused, since Grandma's health had begun to fail. As soon as the door closed behind us, my mother broke down. I am so sorry, Natalie. I should have stood up for you. I should have been stronger. Why were not you? I asked the question that had been burning inside me for years, finally emerging. All those times Aunt Patricia belittled me. All those family gatherings where I was treated like an outsider. Why did you never say anything? My mother sank onto the piano bench, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. I was afraid she admitted. After I married your father, Patricia made it clear that my place in the family was conditional on my behavior. When you chose a different path, I was caught in the middle. You chose her over me, I said quietly. Your own daughter. I thought I could protect you better by staying in their good graces, she said, though the excuse sounded hollow, even to her. I thought if I challenged them directly, they would cut us off completely. But they did anyway, I pointed out. They cut me off from Grandma when she was dying. Did you know that? My mother's face crumpled. I suspected, but Patricia said it was on doctor's orders. I should have questioned it more. I should have done so many things differently. We sat in silence for a long moment, years of unspoken hurt hanging between us. Natalie, my mother, finally said, I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but please know that I love you. I have always been proud of you, even when I was too weak to say it. Part of me wanted to reject this belated declaration to hold on to the anger that had protected me for so long. But another part recognized the sincerity in her words, and the opportunity for healing that Grandma had perhaps foreseen. I need time, I said eventually. This is all too much to process right now. She nodded, understanding. Of course. Please do not shut me out completely. As we left the music room, I noticed Alexander speaking with Graham near the front door. He caught my eye and approached. Miss Bailey, there is something else you should know, he said quietly. Your grandmother asked me to tell you that the wooden box, I believe you know which one, contains additional information she wanted you to have before making any decisions about the conditional bequests. I nodded, thinking of the box waiting in my apartment. Thank you, Mr. Morris. I will look at it tonight. The drive home from the estate was surreal. I kept expecting to wake up from what felt like an impossible dream, or nightmare depending on which aspect I focused on. The inheritance itself was overwhelming enough, but the responsibility Grandma had placed on me regarding the rest of the family felt almost crushing. Once home, I went straight to the wooden box I had retrieved from the attic months ago. Opening it again, I examined the contents more carefully. The photographs showed Grandma in her younger years, with people I did not recognize, including a young man who was definitely not my grandfather. The letters were correspondence between Grandma and this same man, spanning decades. The final letter, dated just 2 years ago, revealed that he had been her first love, separated by family disapproval and social expectations. I chose security and family approval over love, she had written in a journal tucked beneath the letters. It has been my lifelong regret, one I do not wish for Natalie to repeat. Deeper in the box, I found detailed accounts of incidents involving my family, times when Patricia had intercepted my calls, when family members had spoken cruelly about me behind my back, when I had been deliberately excluded from gatherings. Grandma had documented it all, building a case not just for her will, but for my eyes as well. Most shocking was a series of emails printed out between Patricia and the daytime nurse, explicitly instructing her to limit my access to Grandma. We cannot have her influencing Mother's decisions at this vulnerable time, Patricia had written. Financial matters are being settled, and Natalie's interference could be problematic. The evidence was damning and heartbreaking. My family had not just neglected me, they had actively worked to separate me from the one person who truly accepted me. Over the next week, I met several times with Alexander to discuss the estate. The inheritance was even larger than I had initially understood. Not just the house and liquid assets, but investment portfolios, art collections, and partial ownership in several businesses. It was overwhelming, but Alexander patiently walked me through everything, explaining Grandma's financial strategies and the infrastructure she had established. Your grandmother was quite savvy, he told me during one meeting. She restructured much of her estate over the past 5 years, focusing increasingly on ethical investments and philanthropic ventures. That sounds like her, I said. smiling at the memory of our conversations about responsible wealth. 2 weeks after the will reading, I called a family meeting at the estate. Everyone attended, of course. Their potential inheritances depended on it. The atmosphere was tense but artificially polite, everyone on their best behavior. I had spent days considering what to do, reviewing Grandma's documentation, and reflecting on what she would have wanted. When everyone was gathered in the main sitting room, I stood before them nervous but determined. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I have given a lot of thought to Grandma's wishes and the conditional bequests she established." The room was silent, all eyes focused intently on me. "I believe Grandma wanted this situation to be an opportunity for healing and growth, not further division," I continued. "So I have decided to offer a compromise." Hope visibly surged through the room, quickly tempered by wariness. "The conditional bequests will be available as Grandma intended," I said, "but with one additional requirement that I believe honors her values." "What requirement?" Uncle Roger asked cautiously. "Community service," I replied simply. "Each family member who wishes to receive their portion must complete 500 hours of verified volunteer work with one of the non-profit organizations Grandma supported secretly for years." The silence that followed was telling. Expressions around the room ranged from shock to calculation to outright dismay. 500 hours, Patricia finally exclaimed. "That is ridiculous. We have careers, responsibilities, lives." "The requirement can be fulfilled over the course of a year," I explained calmly. "That is less than 10 hours per week. The organizations offer evening and weekend opportunities to accommodate working schedules." "This is just another way for you to control us," Heather accused, her brief facade of friendliness completely abandoned. "No," I corrected her. "This is a way to honor Grandma's values and the causes she believed in. The choice is entirely yours. Participate or do not, but the conditions are non-negotiable." As arguments erupted around the room, I watched their true characters emerge once again. The brief period of forced kindness had evaporated at the first sign that money would not be easily obtained. In that moment, I understood exactly why Grandma had structured her will as she had. She had known precisely what would happen, that given the choice between genuine personal growth and easy money, most of them would reveal their true priorities. The meeting ended with most of the family storming out, making threats about contesting the will, or never speaking to me again. Only my mother remained behind, quiet and thoughtful. "I will do it," she said simply when we were alone. "Not for the money, but because I need to make amends, to you and to Mom." Her sincerity touched me. "I believe you," I said. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope for our relationship. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Grandma had given me not just an inheritance, but a chance to see my family clearly and to establish healthier boundaries. She had given me the strength to stand up for myself and for values that mattered. In her final act, she had set me free. 6 months passed, bringing with them both challenges and unexpected joys. The transition from nonprofit program director to estate manager was not easy, but I approached it with the same dedication I had brought to my previous work. With Alexander's guidance, I established a foundation in Grandma Eleanor's name, focused on the causes she had secretly supported for decades. The estate itself underwent a transformation. The formal sitting rooms where family tension had simmered for years were converted into meeting spaces for community organizations. The extensive gardens became open to the public one weekend each month, with educational programs about sustainable horticulture. The guest house where cousins had once stayed during obligatory holiday visits now housed a rotating residency for artists from underserved communities. Through it all, I discovered layers to my grandmother that I had never fully appreciated during her life. Alexander provided me with records of her anonymous donations dating back 30 years, contributions to educational programs, women's shelters, immigrant support services, and dozens of other causes. She had maintained this secret philanthropy, even while maintaining the appearance of conventional wealth that satisfied the family's expectations. Your grandmother supported over 40 different organizations, Alexander told me during one of our regular meetings. Most had no idea who their benefactor was. Even more moving were the letters that began arriving once news of the foundation's establishment became public. People whose lives had been touched by Grandma's generosity wrote to share their stories, scholarships that had enabled first-generation college students to graduate debt-free medical treatments that had saved lives, small businesses launched with microloans that had grown into thriving enterprises. I never knew who helped me when I had nowhere else to turn. One letter read, "Now that I know it was Eleanor Bailey, I want her family to understand what a difference she made in my life." These revelations gave me a sense of purpose and connection to Grandma that helped ease the pain of her loss. I was not just managing assets. I was continuing a legacy of compassion and practical support that had always been her true passion. My relationship with my mother gradually healed as well. True to her word, she committed to the volunteer requirement, working weekends at a literacy program for immigrant families. To my surprise, she discovered a genuine passion for the work that went beyond fulfilling an obligation. "I never realized how fulfilling this could be," she admitted, during one of our now regular Sunday brunches. "Your father and I are even talking about downsizing our house so we can both reduce our work hours and volunteer more." The change in her was remarkable. A lightness and authenticity I had not seen since my childhood. Freed from Patricia's influence and the pressure to maintain appearances, she was becoming the mother I had always needed. The rest of the family took varied paths. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Roger followed through on their threat to contest the will, but as Alexander had promised, Grandma's legal preparations were impeccable. After a brief and expensive legal battle, they withdrew their challenge and cut off contact completely. Most of my cousins followed their parents' example, choosing resentment over reconciliation. Taylor, however, surprised everyone by quietly approaching me about the volunteer requirement. "I do not expect you to believe me," she said during an awkward coffee meeting, "but I have been thinking a lot about Grandma and what she valued. I would like to try to understand that better." Her sincerity seemed genuine, and over the following months, she became a regular volunteer at a youth arts program. Our relationship remained cautious but gradually warmed as we found common ground in creative approaches to community support. Alexander Morris, initially just Grandma's attorney, became a valued mentor and friend. His decades of experience with wealthy families and philanthropic structures proved invaluable as I navigated my new responsibilities. "Your grandmother was one of my favorite clients," he confided during a dinner celebrating the foundation's 6-month milestone. "Most people with her resources were focused solely on preservation and growth. Eleanor always asked first, 'How can this money do the most good?'" The wooden box from the attic continued to yield insights as I gradually worked through its contents. The most precious discovery came near the bottom: Grandma's personal journal, spanning the last 5 years of her life. Its final entries, written in an increasingly shaky hand, were addressed directly to me. "My dearest Natalie," she had written, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. I want you to know that watching you grow into the compassionate, principled woman you have become has been my greatest joy. Where others in our family chose status and appearance, you chose substance and authenticity. That is why I am entrusting you with everything I have built." Her words brought both tears and clarity. The inheritance was never meant as a reward or a punishment for the family, but as a tool placed in the hands of the person she trusted to use it wisely. Inspired by this understanding, I established a new tradition: quarterly community dinners hosted at the estate, bringing together Foundation Partners Program recipients, volunteers, and community members. The first such gathering coincided almost exactly with the 1-year anniversary of Grandma's passing. As I looked around the dining room that had once hosted tense family holidays, now filled with diverse faces and genuine conversation, I felt Grandma's presence more strongly than I had since her death. This was her true legacy: not the assets or the property, but the connections formed and the lives improved through purposeful generosity. To Eleanor, Alexander proposed a toast, raising his glass. Who understood that the true value of wealth lies in how we share it. To Eleanor, the room echoed, many eyes damp with emotion. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, I walked through the gardens Grandma had loved so much, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The inheritance had brought challenges I never anticipated, but also opportunities I never could have imagined. Through it all, I had discovered strengths within myself that I had not known existed. True family, I had learned, was not always defined by blood. It could be built through shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for one another's well-being. Grandma had known this all along, and had given me not just her material assets, but the freedom to create a different kind of family around me. As the stars emerged in the clear night sky, I made a silent promise to my grandmother to continue building on the foundation she had established, to use the resources she had entrusted to me with wisdom and compassion, and to never lose sight of the true purpose of privilege, to lift others up alongside you. What would you do if you suddenly inherited wealth, but it came with the responsibility to heal family wounds? Would you use it as leverage or as a bridge to understanding? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that true wealth lies in how we treat each other, not what we possess. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and discovery.